Welcome to our first podcast about performance development at Cincinnati Children's. I'm Aubrey Whitty, part of the HR Talent Management team, and it's my pleasure to talk with Shereia Hill today. And she is here to discuss the importance of talking with your team about their performance development. She offers some simple tips to make the process easier for employees and easier for managers. Shereia, give me a little bit of background for who you are in the organization.
I'm an employment support specialist within patient services. I've been employed with Children's Hospital now for 19 years, but I have experience with managing direct reports for about 12 years.
Fantastic. And as a manager, how do you think about the topic of performance development?
So performance development is not only an opportunity for leaders to provide feedback, to staff, but it's also an opportunity for staff to share their feedback and provide their interests related to their role, the work that they do. And this is also an opportunity for them to solicit new opportunities by doing so as well. And although as a leader, we understand that it could be very time consuming, I also think it's very important that leaders understand the importance of having that one-to-one contact with employees.
So in a given year, employees have all kinds of conversations with their managers, right? They say, I'm going on vacation, I'd like to take time off, this is what I'd like to do with my schedule. What makes a conversation around performance development meaningful?
Okay, so meaningful conversation to me is a way to provide direct, helpful feedback where both the employee and leader are able to engage in constructive feedback or constructive conversations, via it be positive or negative. And I'm a strong believer that although you have to provide negative feedback to staff at times, you shouldn't always take a negative as a negative, but sometimes take that negative and find ways to turn it into a positive.
What do you suggest that a manager does to best prepare to have a meaningful performance development conversation with an employee?
Okay. A manager can prepare for meaningful conversations by gathering or reviewing the employee's performance. So some of the things that I've done in the past, I look at, what type of feedback I've received about an employee. Has the employee received any acknowledgments from others, patients, families, their peers? What committees, have the employee been, involved in, have they participated in any volunteer outings throughout the organization, the ambassador program? What ideas has the employee brought to the team? Are they open to providing their feedback? How reliable is an employee? What does their attendance look like? Have they had any performance or disciplinary concerns? I also solicit employees regarding his or her ideas regarding the department. Have they been open to saying, this is what I like and this is what I think, would work well? And what can I do differently as a manager? I think that is a very important question as a leader to also ask, their staff, because managers don't always do things right either. So what can I do differently,
So as a manager, you should be giving your employees feedback kind of throughout the year. But sometimes we hear the story that a manager only gives me negative feedback. And at the performance development time, it comes as such a surprise that I messed this thing up and I have to improve. So what's your advice to kind of deal with that and have more regular discussions?
So providing feedback in real time has always been a very, very, very important aspect in the relationship between me and an employee, because if an employee is getting that feedback in real time, by the time, performance development comes up, annually, they should already know what to expect, because me as the manager, I've already had that conversation with the employee on, some things they can do differently, based on feedback. And we've already identified some goals based on that conversation. So when performance development comes around, they already know, and it doesn't come as a surprise to them, the feedback that I may provide at the time.
Great. So it's like performance development, and a performance development conversation is sort of the icing on the cake, but you've already built up the layers by having those conversations throughout the year.
Yes, although I know that it's very time consuming because I know there's managers that have 20, 30, 40, 50, even 60 direct reports. I think it's also important as a leader to understand that it's important, to have that open door policy, or just set some time, on your schedule throughout the day or throughout the week to say, I'm going to block, just an hour on Friday, to be able to meet with employees, give them that opportunity to have a voice, or, even to be able to share that feedback. We can't let our work, stop us from, having those very, very important conversations.
Because having those conversations is a really important part of being a manager.
Yes, very. It's much easier for me to do like a spreadsheet to try to keep track of, who's on attendance warning, who's done something great, who's on this committee. So again, when performance development comes around, I kept track of what has happened throughout the year. And again, I document when I've already had a conversation. So, when performance development comes up, it's easy to identify what needs to be discussed at that time.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like one of the best pieces of advice you have is to not only have conversations in real time with employees, but to track that information so you're not having to do everything all at once when a performance development conversation comes about.
That is correct. And I've encouraged employees, when we have conversations. So for an example, if I'm providing feedback to an employee and we've had a conversation based on feedback that they need to know, be it be good or positive or negative, I follow up with an email to say, thank you for, meeting with me today. And based on our conversation, we've identified A, B, and C as some things you need to work on. And although I understand that you've identified X, Y, and Z are some things that you need to work on, these are going to be some goals we're going to work on for the next 30 days or 60 days or whatever we identify within that conversation.
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions around performance development is that it's not useful for anybody, right? It's just a way to check a box. But when it's done well, it can be a really positive experience, not just for a manager, but especially for an employee. Can you tell me about a time where you provided feedback throughout the year and you had a performance development conversation and it worked really well?
Yes. So I had an employee who she got very bored with her job. So with being bored in her job, she often drifted off to do like silly things, just, being a silly person at work. So we actually were able to sit down and talk about some of these things that she wasn't doing correctly. And I just asked the question, what is making you bored? What is it that you actually like to do? So once this individual identified what it is that she liked to do, because she was a people person, loved, going on the unit, talking to the charge nurses, engaging with the patients and family. She wanted to do something a little different, something more. She identified that she had, worked in leadership roles before coming to children's, and not that, she wanted to be like an authoritative figure, but she just liked being in a leadership role. So with some coaching and development, within 12 months, I had a backup team leader position to come available. And, with me encouraging this individual throughout the year, letting her know that I supported her, I wasn't going to let her fail. She actually was offered a backup team leader position. So that was within 12 months. And then within 24 months, 2 years, I actually had a team leader position become available, and she was able to go from, being an employee, bored in her role, to becoming a team leader, which made her extremely happy. She was excelling in her work because she loved what she was doing. And not that she didn't like, again, what she was doing in her previous role, but she identified what her strengths were. We worked through that. I was able to eventually get her in that role, and now she's exceeding.
That's a fantastic story. And it says everything about the possibility that performance development can be a fantastic tool to really develop and grow individuals in this organization and employees so that they are engaged, right? And so that they are using their best strengths at work. And I mean, how does that make you feel as a leader to have been a part of that?
Oh, it makes me feel great because I have people to come back and say, thank you, Miss Shereia, for doing this. You believed in me and I've done this. And even over the years, like I've had, a lot of employees that may have started off as a PCA and they have now become a RN or respiratory therapist, or they work in research, and they're like, I remember all of these things that you've done for me. I remember, you giving me the opportunity just to come in your office and just cry because I was overloaded in school, but you supported me through that hard time. So again, just giving staff, just listening, giving them the opportunity, you as their leader, just to listen, can go a very, very long way.
That's great. So when you think about your time, not as a manager, but as an employee here, and also the things that you think have worked best when having these conversations, what do you suggest employees do, and how should they approach their manager in having a really good performance development discussion?
Well, I think it's important too that not only the employee come to, a performance development meeting prepared with what they would like to talk about, because sometimes as a leader, although we may all have different practices on how we document or how we come up with the annual performance development information on the employee, I think it's important that the employee document or journal. Like I've encouraged people, like, hey, make sure you document that or make sure you capture that, because we're not always able to capture those specific moments, or we don't always see, what they do, or we don't always know, what a parent may say to them. So start journaling, hey, I was up on this unit and a parent requested me to come back and they told me how great of a job I did. Or, hey, we've had employees, or another example I can give, we had a employee where she was late to work because a family or a patient passed out at the elevator. And, again, when I'm doing performance development, I may not have captured that moment, hey, 6 months ago, you helped this family, at the elevator, caused you to be late, although we worked through that. But those are some of the things that we may not catch or capture. So journal what you've done, highlight, some of the things that you think you should be recognized for, because we don't always capture those specific moments.
So what I think I'm hearing is that managers need to make sure they're consistently capturing the conversations and the information and the data that they have available to them. Things like, are you showing up to work on time? Are you volunteering for committees, etc. But also, employees have to do their part, and you have to track for yourself, what are the things that I'm accomplishing? What are the things that I'm interested in? What's the feedback that I'm maybe getting, not from my manager, but maybe from other colleagues or patients or families that I can capture and go back to when I have a performance development discussion.
That's exactly it.
So at a really tactical level, when you have 25 direct reports and you know that performance development conversations are coming up, how do you go about setting up time with your employees to make sure that you both capture the information that you need to capture and have meaningful conversations with your employees?
So I would prioritize my work. So look at, let's just say, for an example, the month of June. When you're writing evaluations, look at the meetings that are scheduled, look at the meetings that I can miss. Look at the meetings that are really, really important. Set some time, just schedule some time specific for performance development. If that means, every Friday for the month of June, I'm going to spend 5 hours or 4 hours strictly doing performance management, then I, block out time, but I make sure that that is a priority for me, to make sure that these evaluations are getting done.
And when you're setting up times with your employees, are there any expectations that you set with them prior to those conversations?
Prior to the conversations, one of the things that we would do, we would put out a timeline. We want to make sure that you select your peers by this specific date, because the organization also puts out timelines on when they would like to have everything done, but typically departmentally we would set, like, maybe push it up a week or two to make sure that it was done and everybody has all of the information that they needed. But yes, we would set guidelines on what needed to be done and due dates, what types of information that's needed. What are some things that you want to highlight within your performance development, your evaluation. So yes.
So, Shereia, as we wrap up this conversation, what do you wish that more people understood about performance development at Children's Hospital?
I would say the one thing that I think more people understood is the importance of having the conversation. Just in general, the importance of having the conversation, because this, performance development, it doesn't necessarily define who you are, but this is your work. This is you. This is your performance. This is a way to identify, this is what I've done. It's so important to know and to have that feedback, to help with your own individual development. And without performance development and having those conversations with staff, staff don't always know what they don't know. So it's important that these conversations are had.
Is there anything about performance development or about the process or your experience with it that I didn't ask you or you think is really important for people to know?
Just try to stress the importance of making sure you find the time to meet with your employees. It shouldn't be optional to say, hey, we're not going to meet, or I'm too busy, but finding the time out of your day or week or your busy schedule to meet with staff, that is very, very important to the development of all of the staff.
Shereia continues to make a difference. I really like her suggestion that employees can care for their careers by using something as simple as a journal. Managers aren't always there when a parent makes a compliment to you, and they don't always have the line of sight into every contribution that you make. Employees should record events, both good and bad, that they can share later with their managers. Managers should do the same. Create a log, like an Excel spreadsheet, of the various aspects of each employee's work, both the positive and the negative. When were they late and why? When did they take an extra shift? Did a patient or a family mention them by name? Something so simple can make reviews and career planning easier and more meaningful. Thank you for taking the time today to listen and learn about performance development at Cincinnati Children's.